If you're a regular viewer of the program, you know that we like to answer questions that some of you email us. And tonight, we want to look at some of the election-related questions. Benit Breach is back to answer some of those. You've heard from a lot of people who are talking about trade. What are people wondering?
So one of the big things that they're wondering is about trade within Canada. So I'm going to start with some context here for our viewers. So on Friday, you might remember that Liberal Party leader Mark Carney had a meeting with premiers where a key discussion was trade within Canada, reducing barriers when it comes to energy, critical minerals, transportation, and essentially reducing those barriers. And that day, they agreed to develop a national strategy for free trade, which they say would come in by Canada Day. So that's kind of the context there. Let's get to the question. So thinking of that, Raj Krishnan asked us, why were these interprovincial barriers put in the first place? Was it to protect smaller rural communities? There must have been a reason. Well, Raj, you are partly correct in that reason. So part of the reason is that provinces do this to protect some of their own sectors. So, if you live in one part of the country, it might be hard to buy things from another. Let's think of liquor stores, for example. If you're in BC, it might be hard to find a lot of Ontario wine here, even though Ontario is a mass producer of wine. And I also did put this question to a political scientist at the University of British Columbia. Take a listen to what he had to say.
So provinces can regulate trade. Strictly speaking, they're not supposed to regulate it against other provinces in Canada, but you can write regulations that are distinctive to your province. Or provincial corporations like the Liquor Control Board, for example, can have purchasing instructions that privilege things inside the province.
So there you go, a little bit to help competition. Now, another reason is we got to think about regulations. A lot of things can be provincially regulated. So if you're a doctor, a lawyer, a nurse, you often have to get a license in that province to practice. You can't just say, okay, I'm from BC, I'm going to go to Ontario now, I'm going to start being a realtor or a nurse there. And relicensing means time, effort. It may mean also to spend money to try and do it all over again, right? So that could be another barrier for people.
Yeah, although of course there are many people now saying whether it's buying wine or being a realtor, it's time for a lot of those barriers to be removed. We'll see if that happens. Among the questions we had, basic questions about who can and can't vote in the election.
Yes. So one of the questions we have right now is from Marianne Khalil, and has asked, can permanent residents of Canada, can they vote in this critical election? So permanent residents, again, are folks who, they're not citizens. They have immigrated recently to Canada, but they're not citizens. And Marianne, the answer to your question is no. They can't. That's because citizens have different rights than permanent residents do. And one of the key differences here is that if you are a citizen of Canada, you get to vote federally. Now, that's not to say this hasn't been debated in the past, where, there has been debate on can we allow permanent residents to vote in provincial elections or municipal elections, but hasn't happened. So short answer is no to that.
All right. And let me see if we have time for one more question. I think we do. CL wants to know, do taxpayers pay for the campaign planes and buses? And if they do, then how can a party, the Conservatives, ban the media from those campaign planes and buses?
Yeah, so again, the context here again is the Conservatives recently banning media. This has been a decades-old tradition of embedding journalists. I was told that many of these expenses when it comes to your planes, your campaign buses, they're not directly paid by voters. These are things the party has been fundraising for. They kind of have their own budgets set aside for that. But I did also hear that more from Professor Johnson about this, and here's what he had to say about those expenses.
That's something that grows out of the traditional logic of campaigns, whereby the leader's tour was sort of the most important moving media event in the campaign, and so it made sense for the parties. So nothing in nature requires the party to make a plane available to journalists.
So really he's saying, it is up to the discretion of the party there, and probably have defended this by saying it's an opportunity to meet more local journalists as opposed to those who are constantly covering politics. So that was his reason behind that. All
right, Benit, you're in all this week for Sarah Galashan, so we will see you tomorrow night.
Yes, all right.
Thank you. Many of you have been reaching out with questions about the election, but election officials are concerned about where others might be getting their information from and fearing that those people may be falling prey to misinformation. To help us break down Election Canada's efforts to combat that, we're joined by Angus Bridgman. He's the director of the Media Ecosystem Observatory and assistant professor at the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill University, and he joins us from Montreal. Angus, Elections Canada has been in touch with social media platforms. Do you have a sense of what other steps Elections Canada is taking?
We have efforts underway by Elections Canada to sort of protect the information integrity of the election. A lot of this is coming out, of course, of the Hague Commission, the Federal Commission on Foreign Interference, where there were a whole set of recommendations. And really the clarion call coming out of that report was disinformation is a major threat, the major threat to Canadian democracy. And it's not sort of your traditional kind of way of thinking about foreign interference. It's really that disinformation component. And so Elections Canada is sort of acting. And yeah, one of the steps is absolutely to try to work with the social media platforms to improve the spaces there and ensure that there's not specifically kind of election related misinformation.
So I was kind of struck by at least the portion of the statement from Elections Canada I saw that Elections Canada was asking these social media platforms to combat disinformation during the election campaign. How much power does Elections Canada actually have to be able to get the social media platforms to comply?
So there isn't that sort of at the platform level, there's not that much enforcement. There is in the Elections Act certain types of misinformation that are prohibited. So specifically like telling people that it's the wrong election date or that their polling station is incorrect or giving false information about candidates or political parties. So there's like very specific kind of they're enumerated there. But in terms of actually working with the platforms, to a certain extent, they're relying on goodwill and cooperation by the platforms.
So let's talk about TikTok and X. TikTok, owned by a Chinese company, has been identified many times by the Canadian and U.S. governments and other governments as being a potentially dangerous social media platform because of its foreign ownership. X, owned by Elon Musk, has kind of thumbed its nose at convention when it comes time to trying to limit misinformation. So what about those? I mean, both of those platforms have a lot of people who follow them. How likely is it that they will comply with what Elections Canada wants?
So TikTok has come out very proactively and sort of stated a variety of things that they're doing. TikTok actually, out of the major social media platforms now, has some of the most stringent sort of content moderation policies, and any user of that platform will see that like certain words are not allowed, and there's a high degree of moderation. People have a lot of control over their comment sections and things like that. So TikTok is kind of up there in terms of content moderation. What I'll say though is that X and TikTok are important platforms and are certainly where people like to talk about social media, but actually Canadians are still largely on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. These are the older platforms, but still have sort of a much higher usership amongst Canadians. And so these are some of the platforms that, I'm particularly concerned about and thinking about. The meta platforms, Facebook and Instagram, have both kind of clawed back their trust and safety teams, their moderation, they're lower staffed, and they've kind of walked back from their commitment to having sort of a safe and open public square during a debate, and so or during an election. So we haven't seen sort of election integrity initiatives from them like we've seen, for example, in the 2021 or 2019 Canadian elections.
So there is disinformation that agents will try to actually, in the case of an election, change the results by putting information out almost as a weapon. But beyond that, there are things that are edited out of context. There are things that people share thinking it's true and it's not, doesn't really reflect what was really said. So why don't we finish with this? What advice do you have for people who are watching, who are relying on Facebook or Instagram or another platform for their election news? What should they be looking out for?
There's nothing wrong with getting your news from social media, but one of the things, and every Canadian, those who consume new and old media forms, just be very intentional. Ask yourself a few questions when you're consuming information. Is this person Canadian? Do they have the interests of my community, myself, my family at their heart? And do they care about kind of the outcome of the election in a way that is not self-serving? And if the answer is no to any of those questions, then Canadians should be very careful about following paying attention to and over kind of relying on that information. We're going to have a lot of voices from outside the country telling Canadians what to think, what to believe throughout the election. And they shouldn't be doing that. There's this great movement to buy Canadian right now, buy Canadian information, spend time consuming Canadian content.
Professor Bridgman, thank you very much for speaking with us tonight.
My pleasure.
Angus Bridgman, Director of the Media Ecosystem Observatory and Assistant Professor at the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill University.